Now, a couple days ago, I posted a video talking about a rumor that Daisy Ridley, who plays Rey, would be returning in one of the next Star Wars trilogies, and I argued that would make sense because they'd want a well-known character to help sell an otherwise new story, one set apart from the Skywalker saga that would otherwise primarily have a new cast of characters, not unlike how the original trilogy characters helped sell and bring in an audience for the sequel trilogy. Furthermore, I speculated there's a good chance she might be under contract to do so, because if Disney and Lucasfilm were being smart about the long-term future of Star Wars, and I know saying that might get a chuckle out of some of you, anyway, they would have tried to lock down all these new actors for more movies beyond just the 3 sequel films. That way, someday down the road, you could politely force them all back to make a new trilogy without the hassle of contract negotiations, or one or more of them just flat out refusing to come back. In fact, I'd be surprised if that wasn't part of the deal. You want to play the lead role in a Star Wars film or one of the main supporting characters and have your career instantly propelled to superstardom levels? Well, then you have to sign on not just for this new trilogy, but you have to come back down the road if we want you to. And I'm sure that's a deal all of these actors, who were pretty much relative unknowns 5 or 6 years ago when they signed on, were willing to make at the time. However, in a recent interview with BuzzFeed, Daisy Ridley said she will not be back in either of the new trilogies that are supposedly in the works, neither the one from Benioff and Weiss from Game of Thrones fame, nor from Rian Johnson, assuming he's still getting one, and that, as we've been told, these new movies will be separate from anything we've seen out of Star Wars before, and be completely new. Then when she was asked if she would ever return to Star Wars, all she said was, it's a great universe, I've had a great time. And though I'm no body language expert, the way she says it and kind of rolls her eyes as she does it says to me it's not something she really wants to do, but again, it might be forced on her one day. I certainly could be wrong, and if you want to check out that part of the interview where she talks about Star Wars, I'll have a link to it in the description below. Either way, it seems like Rey definitely won't be in another Star Wars movie anytime soon, which means these new films after the rise of Skywalker really are going to see how powerful that Star Wars name alone is, especially with a 3-year break before the next films hit theaters. We're going to see if the general audience and more casual fans of the franchise will care and turn out in droves when the Skywalkers, or any characters that have been associated with them, are out of the picture entirely. If a movie about Han Solo can flop, relatively speaking, how hard is it going to be to sell people on something completely new from Star Wars? Which I guess means the question becomes, just how vested are people in the actual Star Wars galaxy or franchise itself, and how much are they only vested or interested in the familiar story of the Skywalkers, and or those well-known characters associated with it, and won't care about something else, something completely new? How many people are going to the sequel trilogy films, especially The Force Awakens, just because they feel or felt like it's something they had to do? It's obviously anecdotal, but I personally know a lot of people who went to The Force Awakens who wouldn't consider themselves Star Wars fans or even close to it, and they went just because. And almost all of them actually liked the movie quite a bit and were surprised I wasn't the biggest fan and that I only thought it was okay. A lot of those same people then also went to Rogue One and The Last Jedi, and opinions on both of those movies were varied amongst the people I know. But when it came to Solo, pretty much no one I know, even some people who would consider themselves casual Star Wars fans, went to see that movie, and many of them still haven't. And I know some will want to argue that Solo's failure was the result of Star Wars fatigue, but I'd argue it's more the result of hugely inflated initial interest, and it's just slowly deflating. And the reason why that's happening is Lucasfilm isn't currently creating truly great, memorable characters in these films, certainly not the same way a company like Marvel has. Because it wasn't the name Marvel that built up the MCU and made Endgame one of the most successful films in history. It was the characters they'd wonderfully and skillfully built up over the years that did it. In other words, people went to that movie, to Endgame, to see Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, and all the others take on Thanos. They didn't go just because the brand attracted them to it. And though you certainly can't directly compare Star Wars with Marvel, it's the old apples to oranges thing, but right now the name Star Wars is really what's selling it, or what they're banking on selling it. Don't believe me? Look at the title of Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. Come on. And you've even got Kathleen Kennedy saying the name has no special meaning. Not that I believe that. But if that is true, and they called it The Rise of Skywalker just because, how sad is that? Just think about it. In all reality, shouldn't it be called The Rise of Rey or something like that? But you can't call it that because people would only roll their eyes because that character's name wouldn't sell the movie anywhere near as well as the name Skywalker would, or like they hope it will. which is probably one of the main reasons why she'll not be coming back in one of these next trilogies, because depending on how well this last movie is received and how she's used in it, I don't know that Rey would even help sell another trilogy to all that many people. And though Daisy Ridley has said that this last movie, Episode 9, will be epic, well, not to be pessimistic, but that doesn't mean a whole lot, because what else is she going to say about it? And sure, it might be epic, and it may end up being a great movie, and I sure hope it is, but I'm not going to take the lead actress's word for it. And if it is a dud, if The Rise of Skywalker doesn't deliver a truly satisfying ending to the whole Skywalker saga on top of being a good movie on its own, if the average moviegoer shrugs their shoulders after seeing it, then good luck to the next Star Wars trilogy that starts in 3 years, one that they say will take us to a new time and place in the Star Wars galaxy, though it'll probably take us to the Old Republic, which won't be all that new to many of us fans. And the thing is, if it is Old Republic, you'll have some of us who will scoff at the idea of Jedi vs. Sith again, and if it isn't, you'll also have some scoffing the other way. No Jedi vs. Sith? Well, then I'm not seeing it. And look, I'm excited to see something new and different out of a Star Wars movie or trilogy. I'm excited to be taken to a whole different time and place, one that even the EU never touched on. And though at the core of Star Wars it's always been the battle of good versus evil, which has been Jedi versus Sith, I'd be open to something without them, as long as it's good and as long as it still feels like Star Wars. In fact, I've argued in other videos that it's probably what they need to do at this point. But it didn't have to be that way exactly, and though I could certainly be proven wrong in just under 6 months when The Rise of Skywalker comes out, to me it feels like Lucasfilm had no plan to accomplish something or anything with this sequel trilogy outside of just making money. They didn't seem to think ahead, to ponder how this trilogy could be used to springboard them into something else. They just started making movies and expected them to sell because the name is Star Wars. Problem is, that name doesn't mean quite so much to a lot of people anymore. Those who went to see The Force Awakens just because it was Star Wars aren't likely to go see another trilogy 3 years after this one is done for that same reason. And though I'll fully admit, all I really am is just some guy who talks about Star Wars on the internet, and I'm no expert in business, management, or anything like that, I do consider myself a practical and logical thinking person. And from on the outside looking in here, they truly give off the impression at Lucasfilm that they don't know what they're doing, that they honestly thought they couldn't fail because they had the name Star Wars on their side, and that fans would eat it up no matter what. And the sequel trilogy was their big chance. As I keep saying, people were going to see those movies no matter what, and they had to hook them with it. They had to do something that got the general audience excited, not only for these movies, but for whatever they might come up with next, or might be planning for next. And not only have they chased off some of their hardcore fans, but I don't know how excited people are for Star Wars in general anymore. How many people outside of those within the hardcore fandom that are still happy would really be all that excited to learn, if they don't know already, that there will be a new Star Wars trilogy 3 years after this one? And I know some of you are going to say this has been yet another negative Thor Skywalker video, that I hate Star Wars because I won't praise it all the time, just because. But the thing is, I'm not going to bury my head in the sand and pretend that everything in the Star Wars franchise right now is great, and that it's not going to face some serious challenges in the near future, especially in the films which have always been the meat and potatoes of the franchise, if you will. Yes, the success or failure of The Mandalorian on the Disney Plus streaming service is going to go a long way in dictating the future direction of the franchise. But if it's not a hit with those outside the core fandom, and these next movies don't bring in the box office numbers they need to, what could have been the golden age of Star Wars will come and go before it ever really had a chance to begin. And the thing is about Daisy Ridley and not being in the next trilogy, well, I was almost a little disappointed to hear that Rey won't be in one of the next trilogies. Not because I love the character or anything, but because I was almost hopeful that there was a plan in place to build something off of this trilogy. And I'm not saying you keep the Skywalker saga going in some way, shape, or form, but something else really should have or could have come out of all of this. Something else should have been built from the sequel trilogy. And yeah, I guess there are some ways you could still do that. One of them being that if the next trilogy goes back in time and gives us the story of Snoke, but considering how irrelevant he's been in the sequel trilogy, I'm not sure anyone would really care, especially outside of the core fandom. In closing here, even if Episode 9 is an epic ending to the Skywalker saga, the question of whether or not people will care about this next trilogy in a few years from now will remain. Will that Star Wars name draw people in at least one more time? And will they at Lucasfilm be able to create memorable stories and characters to keep those people on board and coming back for more in the years to come? In the answer to those questions lies the fate of the entire franchise. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think. Would you have liked to have seen Rey in another trilogy, or are you glad that won't be happening? And do you think these new Star Wars films can be successful when they're not connected to the Skywalker saga? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.